The Sufi Message of Hazrat Inayat Khan, Volume 2, The Mysticism of Sound, Centennial Edition. The Ancient Music. From the Eastern point of view, when one looks at this subject, one finds that the Eastern idea of music originated from intuition. But the tradition of any art, or even science, will tell us the same thing. It is afterwards that humanity begins to believe in the outer things and forgets its origins, which is intuition. Music, according to the ancient people, was not a mechanical science or art. Music was the first language. The proof of this can be found even now in the language of the animals and birds, who express their emotions and passions to one another. At the same time, there are no words, only sounds. It is the combination of the different sounds of the animals and birds which, combined together, have also an effect upon the multitude of the lower creation. If music was the first expressive thing in the lower creation, so it was in humankind also. And since it was the first expression of the emotions and passions of the heart, it is the last expression also of the motions and passions. For what art cannot express, poetry explains, and what poetry cannot express, that is expressed by music. And therefore, music, in all ages, to a thinker, will stand on the highest pedestal of the expression of the deepest self. When the ancient music is compared with the modern, one will find, no doubt, that which is too vast a gulf. But if there is anything by which one can have some little idea of the music of the human race, that is from the Eastern music, which still has traces of the ancient music in it. And the reason is that if it was kept by them as music, perhaps it would not have been kept so intact by them as it has been. But the reason is that it has been kept as part of the religion, and that is the reason why it has been kept on for thousands of years through the tradition. One might ask, how can a music of the ancient times be kept pure? Because always there is a tendency in human nature to alter things. The thing is this, that it was difficult always with the human race to change religion. Anything else may be changed, but there was one thing that was always kept, and that was religion. The religion of the Hindus was Vedanta. In the Vedanta, the fifth aspect was music, which was called Samaveda. In the Western world, there came a time when translations of the Vedas were given, and if there is a part that is not to be found, it is that fifth Veda. The reason is that, being musical, it could not very well be regarded as language. But one can trace back in traditions, by the study of music of the Hindus, that there was a time thousands of years ago when they knew as fine a difference of tones as quarter tones. But it was not only the degree of the sound that was considered in that way, but also the nature and character of the sound was analyzed just like chemistry. We can find today in ancient traditions the different effects attached to the different notes, whether dryness or liquidity, whether cold or heat. No doubt, to distinguish these sounds which express those different effects is today difficult, because the distinguishing is now from the sounds of instruments, and then it was only from nature. And yet, it is most interesting to know that we find today in Sanskrit scriptures the different pitch of sound distinguished in the ancient times. In the absence of pianos or in the absence of tuning forks, they had to determine the pitch to the sound of different animals and birds, and also the sound was distinguished in different ages. One thing, particularly, is that the specific aspects developed in the same way as the art of the ancient Hindu music. One might wonder that it is perhaps natural that this art should develop because they were near to nature. But for that time, for science to develop in this way is more interesting to know. One might ask in what way this art developed among the ancient people, the remembrance of which is to be found even now in the East. The idea was that they attached different themes of music to different seasons, different strains of music to different times of the day and night. And as there is nothing in the world which is without reason also, that was not only an imagination of fancy, but there was a reason behind it, which was logical reason, to attribute certain melodies to certain times. If it was a poetic fancy, it would have lasted for a little period, and would have only influenced a little circle. But it has lasted for ages, till now, and has influenced the whole country. A usage which was carried out for thousands of years, and which continued and today is to be found in the East or West, North or South. It is that same raga sung in the same time. When sung out of that time, it is not appealing. When from the metaphysical point of view we shall find that the realization that today science makes and will ever make, of knowing and realizing that vibration is at the root of the whole of creation, was a certainty to them and the basis of their whole science. They knew that what was created, and what is holding, and in which is held the whole manifestation and the whole cosmos, is one power, and that is vibration. And it was therefore that the astrological science, which had much to do with the influence upon human beings and upon different countries, that same science came out of the science of vibration. And so music as a science was known by them to have a great deal to do with the influence of the planets. And the continual moving and working of the planets and their action upon the earth was the basis of the foundation of their ragas, on which was founded their music. In the Sanskrit tradition of ancient times, there were verses to be found having relation to certain planets. Therefore, according to the influence of the planets of the cosmos, they made their program, and that program was carried out through the whole year. One might think that it is too vague to perceive, or that one could not make a program on the influences of the planets. But at the same time, the whole humanity, in all periods, have arranged their lives according to the planetary influences just the same. In order to keep their music akin to nature, it was necessary for them to give the liberty to the singer and player to sing and play as they wished. Naturally, this lacked uniformity, and it could not be made as a standardized system. It therefore always remained not as an education, but only as an individualistic art. And for this reason, the music of the ancient people had to go through advantages and great many disadvantages. The advantages were this, that a musician and a singer or a player were never bound to sing in a particular way in order to execute properly the music which they had wanted to play before the people. They were always free to give their music the way in which they had been inspired at the time. It gave them their full liberty to express their emotions, their passions, without any outward restriction which they should obey. No doubt, when there came a number of singers and players, it was then necessary to make a certain standard, but yet that standard did not restrict them very much. And it is this order which is called music. The word music, or Sangeet in the Sanskrit language, has three aspects. One aspect is singing, the other aspect is playing, and the third aspect is movement. They have never left the science of movement or dance as a separate thing from music. These have always comprised the three aspects of what they called music. Besides these three ideas, as the music of the Eastern people developed, each aspect of these three aspects developed also. For instance, the way of the singing and the most refined people was quite different from the way the peasants sang. The song of the temple altogether different from the song of the stage. And the difference was so great that it was not only that there were particular rules and regulations to be followed, or there was more mechanical difference, but there was a natural difference. The most important or valuable thing that the music of the ancient people produced, and which gave a great benefit to humanity, was one, they distinguished the different aspects of music, and thereby they came to realize that there was a certain way of expressing the tone and rhythm which brought about a greater emotion and inclination towards action. And they found out together, with this, that there is a certain kind of use of time and rhythm, which brought about a greater equilibrium and a greater poise. This science, developing after the practice of many years, formed in itself a special psychological science or art, and this science was called yoga. The special name for this was mantra yoga. The meaning of the word yoga is unity or connection, and mantra yoga means the sacred union between the outer life and the deeper life, for they found out that there are psychological inclinations. One of the tendencies of the breath is going outward, and the other inclination is going inward. And these two tendencies are to be found in nature also, in the ebb and flow, in the sunset and sunrise. One sees the difference in oneself. The vibrations of one's own body and action make a great difference in the morning and evening. Therefore, yogis regulate the rhythm of the circulation of the heart and every action of the breath by the help of the vibration of music, of tone, and rhythm both. This took them from the audible vibrations to the inward vibration, which means from sound to breath, which in the language of the Hindus is one and the same. It is the sura, which is a name for the sound and breath, which in the language of the Hindus is one and the same. It is the sura, which is a name for the sound and breath, one thing blended in another, because it is the same thing in the end. It is the breath of an object which may be called a sound, and it is the audibility of the breath which may be called voice. And therefore, breath and voice are not two things. Even breath and sound are not two things, if one could understand that both have the same basis. If there is an explanation that can be given why humans rejoice or are impressed by the music played before them, it is all only an amusement or a pastime. No, there is something else besides. The principal reason is that in human beings there is a perpetual rhythm going on, which is the sign of life in them. A rhythm which is expressed in their pulsation and their heartbeats, and even in their hearts. Upon this rhythm depends one's health, and not only one's health but one's moods. Therefore, anywhere a rhythm is continued, it must have an effect upon every person, and upon every person its effect is distinct and different. It is amusing and interesting to know that when the jazz band came into existence, everyone said to the friend, "Oh, something very crazy has come in society," and yet no one has resisted. It has come more and more into fashion, and however a person hates it or is prejudiced against its name, that person at least likes to stand and listen to it for 5 minutes. What is the reason? The reason is that in whatever form the rhythm is emphasized upon the body and mind, it has a psychological effect. Another interesting thing I know is that once it is said of a very great Persian poet, who was a mystic at the same time, that he used to get in a certain mood, and then he used to make circles around a pillar in the middle of his house and chant. He would speak, and people would write down what he said, and it would be perfect poetry. But what is more amusing is that I have known of a lawyer who, when he would find that in his bar, when he was doing his work, when he could not find the argument, would turn round himself, and after that he would find the right argument. But we do not need to find the mystery to these cases. A person who cannot find that idea beats the fingers on the table and taps the fingers, and an idea comes. And many who cannot get their thought through begin to walk through the room. When they have taken 2, 3 circles, their thought becomes right. If that is true, we come to the realization that the human body is a kind of mechanism which must be going on regularly. If it is stopped in some way, there is something stopped in the body or in the mind. The argument brings one to understand that upon the rhythm, the mood and health and condition of mind depend. Not only the rhythm one gets from music, but also the rhythm of one's own breath or walking about has also a great deal to do with the rhythm of one's life. It is very easy to see that there are certain kinds of sound which irritate, which have a bad effect upon the nerves. Then there are other kinds of rhythm which have a soothing or healing, a comforting effect upon the mind. Music is sound and rhythm, and when the sound and rhythm are understood, it is nature and character. Then music would not only be something for a pastime, but then music would become a source of healing and upliftment. The Sufis of the ancient times, the great mystics, used to develop this art to bring about this poise in life after their everyday activity. It is the art which they call sama, and sama has been the most sacred thing for the Sufis, as a meditation for them. They meditated by the help of music, by having a certain music played which had a certain effect upon the development of an individual. The great poets such as Rumi of Persia used to have music for their meditation, and, by the help of music, they used to repose and control the activity of their bodies and minds. When we see today there is a greater and greater tendency to nervousness, it is caused by way too much activity in life. Life is becoming artificial more and more every day, and therefore, with every step advanced, one is missing that repose which has been as a yeast of the human race. And therefore, for the betterment and education of humanity, the art of repose, which seems to be lost, is greatly needed to be found. Many people in the Western world, who at any time read the tradition of an ancient people, often thought that there was an art that it seemed was lost, and that they should go to the East to find it. In order to make it easy for those who search for that art and the science which is most necessary in the evolution of humanity, the Sufi movement has made a facility so that those who wish to study and practice it may do so here instead of going so far in the East.